role at Shopify and maybe how long you've been with the company. And Ben, I'll start with you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Catherine. I'm Benjamin. I've been a product designer for a long time now, but I've been with Shopify as a staff product designer. And our team is working on building the best omni-channel experiences for marketplaces for both merchants and buyers. And I've been at Shopify for a little over 6 months. So yeah.
Nice. Chelsea, could you give an introduction to yourself?
Yeah, sure. Hi, everyone. My name's Chelsea. It's funny because I've actually just joined Shopify. I'm here for I just crossed my second month. So if you have any questions on onboarding and things like that, I'll be very happy to answer them. Prior to that, I've been a product designer not as long as Ben for about 5 years. But yeah, that's kind of where I am in my career right now.
Lovely. And Vihar, how about you? You've just joined us. How long have you been at Shopify and what's your role there?
Yeah, I've been at Shopify for almost 4.5 years now. I'm a senior product designer here, working on the shipping and delivery side of things. Yeah.
And hello, I'm Wenshu. I'm a senior product designer. So I joined the same day as Benjamin. So I think we've been here 8 months, not a bit longer. I've been a designer for about 7-8 years now.
Perfect. Thanks, Wenshu. That's fantastic. Really great, and welcome to you all. And Vihar, I might ask you firstly around the structure of the team. We're going to go through three core areas, really: the team, the company, and the individual. So each of you and what motivates you. So Vihar, around the team and the structure, could you just give a brief overview of the structure of product teams at Shopify and where the product designer role fits within those teams?
Sure. So firstly, design definitely has a seat at the table at Shopify. In fact, it's a comfortable one as well. And we usually work with a trifecta model that is every team has a UX lead, product lead, tech lead, and some teams also have a data lead. In such cases, you would call it a quadfecta. Anyone on the team, including ICs and interns, can pitch ideas, create proposals, and upon getting reviews from leadership, they can champion the project. So everybody is like a product owner at Shopify, and PMs are typically responsible for solving the right problems, whereas UX and tech folks are responsible for building the right solutions, I would say. Anyone else want to chime in?
Fantastic. Well, I guess how does collaboration work within Wenshu? I might ask you, how does collaboration work within your team?
I think we work very, very closely with the trifecta. So like Vihar mentioned, we work with engineers, we work with PMs, right? So that we try not to kind of draw lines right in the team, right? So right from the start, when we have a problem to work on, from the first meeting, right, when we are thinking about first principles, what the problem is, what we should do, we are already having discussions with engineering, having discussions with product. I think one thing that Shopify is really good at as well is support. So we have a very robust support team that talks a lot to merchants. So oftentimes we are also speaking to customer support because they are the ones that are the closest, right, to the end customer. So yeah.
No, fantastic. And the other piece, I guess, Chelsea, I'll direct this to you. People have different responsibilities at different levels. How do you collaborate with those individuals at a different level?
That's a good question. So I actually work directly with Ben. So Ben is actually part of my trifecta. So when I work directly, so Ben and I would have different kind of responsibilities, whereas he's more involved in like talking about strategy, setting strategy, working with senior leadership, whereas I support Ben in thinking about other things. Like for example, like recently I just ran a workshop, and then that workshop Ben used information from that to help with the strategy and roadmap planning. So within designers, we do collaborate very closely as well. But like how Vihar, like what Vihar and Wenshu have also mentioned, we work very closely with all our PMs and our engineers. I talk to them on a very daily basis. I joke that I actually talk to them, my engineers, more than I talk to my own partner. Like talk to them on a very regular basis, ask them for their feedback, ask them for their opinions. And yeah, we also actually work with a content designer on the team. So he's amazing. We get him to give us like fresh eyes on like the things that we write, and he comes up with like guidelines on copy as well. So that's partly how we collaborate as well.
Great, interesting. And you made a point on the teams better than partners, maybe in family and friends. Is that the case for everybody?
I mean, you end up spending like 7 or 8 hours every day, right? Like, so you tend to build rapport, you tend to build relationships. And since many of us are based in Singapore and in APAC regions, restrictions have started easing off. And so we do meet in person as well. So, yeah.
Yeah, it's an interesting time. How are you finding it all? Is there any transition that you're moving back to the offices? Like you're fully remote, but is there any transition that you're moving to meet up as a team, or is that going to look different in the future? Maybe
yeah.
Ben.
So Shopify is a digital by design company, and I think that was a very public announcement where we did intentionally decide to be remote and stay remote intentionally. So we don't know what the future holds, but at the moment, it doesn't look like we might move back into the traditional form of the office. But we might have a bunch of different things which require a short stints where we actually collaborate and get together. Yeah.
Yeah, and we might talk about that later on in the session around remote working, because you would be classed as, I guess, more advanced than a lot of companies in this, or certainly have a step ahead of people. So I'm going to ask you all at a later stage what's been the benefits for you. But Wenshu, I had a question around you and Ben. You mentioned that you started on the same day. From an onboarding perspective, working together, has that helped that you work together? Is there anything that came out of that starting point together?
I think it's always great to have another designer on board at the same time, right? In most companies, you don't have too many designers, right? In a typical team, you might have one, maybe two. So to onboard with another designer is like quite rare. So I think I think a lot of people say this, right? When you first join Shopify, it's like drinking from water from a fire hose. It's such a big company, so much context. So we have this saying, like in the first 6 months, you're not expected to be productive, right? So you're just there to gain context, understand what's going on. You are free to ask stupid questions, get away with it. So having another designer is really good. Someone to complain to, someone to ask, hey, where did you find this Figma file? Where's the link? So it's been good. Yeah.
Also, I think people... Sorry, Vihar, go on.
Also like even if you don't have another designer joining at the same time, Shopify makes sure that you have an onboarding buddy like who will help you through the first few months. You can ask questions, you can ask who to reach out to, you can ask what's going on these projects, all these things. So you have those onboarding buddy pairings that happen. So those are also very helpful.
Really great point. I like the point.
And
on
actually. One more thing that I wanted to add, even if you didn't have an onboarding buddy, right? I think that the way onboarding is designed is very, very intentional, and it's super structured and stuff like that in a company like Shopify. So you have like a whole bunch of people from various different departments and different fields and stuff like that, all joining on the same day. So eventually you'll all be in one Slack group, and it's like a big onboarding party, and you get to know immediately when you join the company, you immediately know like 15, 20, 30 other people from different countries, mostly in the same geographic region. But yeah, so that's also quite comforting, I think.
Yeah. And Chelsea, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, I do. So, I mean, for me, onboarding was a very recent event. So it's funny because I've been told that my group, my onboarding buddies were like the biggest group in Shopify for quite a while. We had like 300 people on board and like 50 just in APAC itself. But the funny thing was, like when you say onboarding for the designer is very rare, I only had an engineer with me in the tech team. So I was like, oh, like it's just both of us. But like I think to touch on a little bit more about onboarding with you, it is very structured. There is a whole program planned out for us. So at the beginning, everybody goes through the same thing, and then it kind of branches off. So if you're in tech, you do something else. Like it's very merchant focused. You actually you create your own stores so that you know how merchant would do things. You actually you are actually a support staff for a day where you actually have to respond to real support emails and pain points, and I found that very helpful in my learning, which helped a lot in my role here as product designer.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm going to move on to the company structure and your roles as product designers and influencing at a company level. Ben, I'm going to ask you this first. Regarding stakeholder management, how have you established a good design practice at a company level?
Okay, so I think it varies from level to level. Establishing a design practice. Okay, so there's this parable that I always talk about every time I think of a company and an organizational structure. It's the one with 10 blind men, and where they kind of are with an elephant, and so different people are kind of touching or feeling different parts of the elephant, and they think it's a different animal altogether. So one of them feels the tail, and then they think it's like a snake. Somebody else is feeling the trunk or the legs and thinks it's a tree trunk or something like that. I feel even organizationally, different teams focus on different things, and it's super important to kind of align and overlap on certain things. And there's naturally going to be areas where you're divergent at as well, and that's a healthy thing. It's a good thing to have a little bit of divergence, because that means that you are having differences of opinion. You are constantly also actually debating and figuring out what is the best end outcome for our merchants. And I think in terms of design, we also kind of prefer when we speak to product managers, engineers, and stuff like that. They all bring in their own sense of very unique perspectives, and that kind of helps, go into this idea jar, and then you can actually hash things out, and then you come up with something that actually is useful and be tested out with the real people that use our software. Yeah.
Love that. Yeah, it's fantastic. And I think it's important bringing in all parts of the team at that ideation level to get different perspectives. Great. And
if I can add something to it, Shopify also has default to open internally. Every Slack channel is open, and anyone can follow any project for updates. So that also helps us, manage stakeholders very easily, and have these conversations. So whenever your work is relevant to some other team's work, you can just jump in there, see their projects, what they're currently working on, and have those conversations.
Yeah, great. And Chelsea, if you're building a product or a feature that has dependencies on another team, like engineering or whatever it might be, what's the process for engaging with them? Is there a formula process, or how do you engage?
So I think when we talk about dependencies, there are two kinds. So one is with my own team, my own engineers, my own PM, and then there's the other one where there are other teams who are also working on other projects. So let me touch about the one on the engineers first. So it's actually there's no formal process, but there is like an unwritten kind of like process that we all follow, which is everybody's in this Slack channel if you're in the same team, and we just talk very freely with each other. We send each other like daily updates or really updates whenever we have updates, and we look everybody very closely into everything we do. So we have very regular meetings, even though we are all in different countries, meetings and workshops and anything that's like where we take notice of like people's time. We respect that as well. So we loop people in when it's necessary, and if it's not necessary, we just update everybody asynchronously. So that's how I actually work very closely with my engineers. So dependencies definitely, but no formal process. If we were to talk about other teams, then that's a whole different story, because Shopify is so big. There are so many teams doing so many different things, and a lot of times there are a lot of overlaps. So the beautiful thing about Shopify is that everybody is so friendly and so open to sharing. And so all you have to do, even if they're like a different time zone away, all you have to do is set up a time with them, be like, hey, I want to find out a little bit more about your project. Can you tell me more? And they're very willing to share with you, talk to you, even make videos and share demos with you. And if you want, you can book the session together. You can work collaboratively with each other, which has happened quite a few times.
I love that. Can you share some of those other how other teams are structured, how they work? Have you got any one that came to mind there?
I mean, I guess without trying to give away too much. So we're kind of like Ben said, we're kind of like the marketplaces team where so there in Shopify there's kind of like a core team where it works on the admin, and then we kind of see ourselves as the layer on top. So core already has so much done, and there's so much information everywhere. So when we do whatever we do, most of the time the first step is we look for like existing research first. So we try to do our own research, and if we need more things, like hey, I'll reach out to core and be like, I noticed that you're working on this. I would notice that you're building this. Could you please share me some files, some Figma files, some flows, or a video demo? And here are some questions. So one thing I really like about Shopify is usually we have like a huge like question session, and I just send them a list of questions, and we get together on like a call together, and just answer everything very openly, and that helps each other in our job because they see what we do and we see what they do. Does that help answer your question?
Yes, no, it's perfect. It's really great. Can I ask and I might, I'm going to leave this open, which shouldn't be done, but I'll leave it open. It's on. We had a talk from Parul who's spoken before about us, and I'll share the link to people on that presentation. But it was around stakeholder management, and it was on find out who your stakeholders are first, and know how they can sabotage your process. And it may seem like a negative way of doing it, but if you don't have your stakeholders aligned and onboarded right, it can cause many implications down the line. How do you identify who your stakeholders are, and how do you figure out what is their own priorities for their workflow? And Wenshu, maybe I might ask you that because you look deep in thought on this.
So there's this thing that a PM once told me, like your amount of impact in a company, right, is proportional to the amount of coffees you can have with people around the office, right? So like if you can just find some random person and have a coffee with them and just talk about anything, right? And you can have it with a lot of different people, like you have a lot of impact, you have a lot of influence, and ultimately it's like based on relationships. So I think the key thing to managing stakeholders, right, is to build relationships, right? If you're working with this director, like set up a call, hey, I just want to say hi, maybe I listened to this talk that you gave, or you wrote this document that's interesting to me, I want to chat about it. So just keep talking to different people and build relationships, right? And so people know you are there. And then once you have relationships built, right, over time, it becomes a lot easier to tease out information, right, from a stakeholder, right? And you can also understand what they work on, what are their fears. So then it really helps with mapping out the stakeholder map, right, so to speak.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and actually, if I could add a little bit about stakeholders, I think that typically whenever we are communicating, right, we always tend to focus on what we want to say and lesser on what somebody who we're communicating to wants to say, and lesser about hearing or listening. And in order for good communication, I think that you need to speak the language of the person you're speaking with. And I think that that might be like, you need to dig below the surface. If it's a product manager, you need to understand what their goals are, what are their metrics, KPIs, why are they even working on this project, what are their main goals, what are they hoping to get out of it and stuff like that. And for all you know, it might actually be getting promoted to a senior product manager role, and that might be the core driving force to work on projects or in their impact their influence. And if you are genuinely able to help somebody else achieve their goals, I honestly feel like, it's like a cycle where it can come back to you, where somebody else is helping you. And I think it's a good way to think about it, and it can work with any department for that matter. So
I like that. Find out the personal motivations of that. And regarding on something like a coffee, how does that work virtually? Let's say at Shopify for building relationships.
It's actually a lot easier, right? Because you are remote, right? So you can just set up a call. And I think people here are like really friendly. Right? The only challenge we have in APAC is time zones. So I think sometimes you kind of have to take calls and later in the evening or earlier in the morning. But like we're pretty good about that. Like if you have a late night call, next day just start work later, right? No one cares. It's a lot easier. We also have this internal tool called Sidekicks. So it's just a bot that randomly matches you with any random like person in Shopify, right? Every 2 or 3 weeks, right? So then you'll be pinged on Slack, hey, set up a time. So that has been very useful. Like I've used that to meet like completely random people, like customer support agent in Ireland, developer in Brazil. It's been nice.
That's a fantastic idea. And sorry, is that what time period did you say that was done? Every 2 weeks?
I think every 2 weeks, but you can. I think it's up to you. And you can even make it like once every week, but that's a bit intense for me. So,
but that is really nice. It seems like there's a very good culture and process at Shopify to help kind of meet people globally.
I think it goes back to the digital by design. So we used to be digital by default when the pandemic hit and stuff like that. And then we transitioned to becoming a more intentional company about having, remote practices and improving on those practices over time. So I think that's how it evolved, I guess.
Yeah, I really like that. Great conversation. Okay. Chelsea, did you have anything to add?
I do. So it also really boils down to culture. So like I said, I've been here for like 2 months and like already so many people have just reached out and be like, hey, you want to set up like a recurring bi-weekly one-on-one where we just talk about anything under the sun. And initially there was a little bit of a foreign concept to me. I was like, why would I hang out with you? I don't even know who you are. And subsequently, it really makes sense because then you really know this person. Like this person's all the way in Australia and Japan. Like I'm starting to have like a friendship with them. Because I have a friendship with them, I have a better working relationship with them. Like, and then I realized that, it's not really all about work. Like work is only like fun because of the people, because of the culture. So I'm very thankful for that.
Yeah, I love it. And yeah, you need to, it's up to the individuals as well to start building the culture. Have any of you at an individual level, without jumping too quickly on, but have any of you created anything that's new for the company at either a cultural level or a process level that you thought was great, either from maybe an old company either?
Designers opening up, let's say, office hours where other designers can book their time and maybe pair on getting fresh eyes or feedback or something like that. So that is one of the other things I've noticed designers starting to do. So that helps in collaborations and again building relationships, as Chelsea mentioned.
Fantastic. Okay, and Wenshu, I might ask you on an individual level, for you personally, what design behaviors, we've discussed this a little bit on the call and I really liked this, what design behaviors do you recommend people should unlearn?
At the risk of being slightly controversial, I think one thing that one should unlearn is to kind of just drop the idea that you are important, right, and you control the design, right? So I think it takes an army of people to build a product, right? And design is just one small part of a really big, like, multifaceted company, right? So when a CEO makes a strategic decision that influences how a product is shaped, right? It's a design decision. When an engineer builds an API a certain way, ultimately it changes the customer UX, right? It's also a design decision, right? So everyone in a way like impacts the design. And it's not just people who work on the product, right? It's also support, marketing, sales, HR. They all influence the end UX, right, in some way. So I think many designers have an inclination towards an like inflated sense of self-importance, right? I'm the head chef, right? I'm the master of good taste. You don't care about design. No one understands my pain, and they storm into the room and throw screens on the wall. And that's just not effective, right? I think as designers, right, to be truly effective, like we need to kind of show up with a lot of humility, right? So like, yes, I'm the designer for the team. That's my job title, but I'm here to listen. I'm here to work with you, right? If a PM wants to wireframe, go ahead. I'm interested to know what they have in mind. If an engineer disagrees with a layout of a page, right, that's fine, right? Let's sit together, and I want to listen to your idea, right? And I want to work with you. So I think when we kind of drop, so I'm not saying design is not important, right? But then just drop that inflated sense of ego, right? A lot of designers tend to have, right? Then you become a much more effective designer.
I think the truth could be said there for engineering, product, UX, you name it, really, is drop the ego. I think if you get into maybe a position of continuous learning and let people take over your role. I must say I've worked with a few designers, and the speed at which a designer would work versus something that I've tested on, you can see why you leave it to the experts. But at the same time, it's even to let somebody's vision or idea, let them run with it, so you get a better sense of what they're trying to achieve and their goals, I think is important too. So I like that. Vihar, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, just to add to Wenshu's point, like we should avoid siloed thinking as much as possible, and invite other disciplines into our own design process. And we have to do it very early in the product development stage as well as often, so that you don't have arguments or discussions later on in the process. Where think about this case, like someone designs something, they go high fidelity, and when you present it to a developer, they might say that, hey, we don't have this data, or, we have these constraints, building this, and, all your work would be a waste, right? So that's why I think everyone should, so cross-discipline pairing should be encouraged a lot. Yeah.
Fantastic. Everyone is going to have an opinion on this topic. So, Chelsea, what is your thoughts on any that needs to be unlearned?
So one thing, just very similar to what I guess Wenshu and Vihar has been saying, one early tidbit or advice that one of my mentors gave me early on in my career is to never attach your worth to your work or your design. So I don't really see this at Shopify, but maybe because I haven't been here very long, but in my previous companies, like this, regardless of how senior or how junior a designer is, sometimes when you give them critique, you give them feedback, they get a little defensive. And then you're just like, but why are you getting so defensive? And then I started to see that, because you see, when you tag your worth onto your design, you're starting to think, it's an attack, when honestly, it's not an attack. So what my mentor said to prevent this was to basically every design decision that you make has to be very logically justified and backed by data. You have to understand what the pros and cons are, why you make this design decision, and what are some data that you use to back this up. So it's very logical, very justified, and it's not emotional. So there's no way you can be like, oh, you're attacking me, because it was not an attack. It's just you're making the decision based on the information you have. And if someone else has more information than you, then that's good. That helps elevate your design.
And what happens to that feeling? Sometimes somebody has just a feeling on something. What happens in that situation?
I just swallow it. I mean, honestly, it's a skill, right? Like all of this is a skill. So when I first started out, I was like, oh, I'll go back and cry. I'm a worm. I'm a terrible designer. And slowly you kind of build a skill up. Like, yeah, you know what? You're just talking about my design. You learn to grow like a thicker skin, as we say it. Just let it, like, just swallow it, and then be like, okay, I'm back on. I'll take your feedback and I'll do it.
Yeah.
As long as users and product is winning, individual feelings should not matter. So yeah.
One thing to add to that, I think that because software moves so fast, right? So that UI that is really nice today is gonna look like shit in 5 years, right? So I wouldn't worry too much about something not being too good, something not being good enough, right? Because in 5 years it's not gonna be good anyway. So it's like
I love that point. That's brilliant. Ben, did you have anything to add as well?
Yeah, I was actually thinking about this. So usually in my career, I've mentored a lot of designers, and especially designers who are very early in their career and stuff like that. I usually have trouble detaching worth with work. And so some of the strategies I remember telling them was don't get work reviewed the day you finish designing it. So even if you finish designing it in the morning or in the afternoon, just take a day, reset, recalibrate, and the next day you can go and present it to whoever you're presenting. But the next day when you do present it, imagine it's not your design. Think somebody else on the team designed it. And that was something that, it's a very silly exercise, but it somehow seemed to work for many people that I ended up trying this on. And so that's something that mostly helped. And the other thing was, I think, some forms of perfectionism. Usually you want to get every single aspect of it right, not just the design, but also maybe communication and collaboration and maybe even discussions and stuff like that with cross-functional peers. And when you focus on getting every single thing right, I think a lot of mental energy is kind of put onto different parts, and then you're stretched too thin. And so one of the things that I think that I would try to unlearn is this act of trying to be forcing perfection everywhere. I would rather focus my energy on the high impact things, and for that I need to be a little reflective and figure out what the high impact things are, and then be a little bit more kind for the things which aren't going as well, I think.
Yeah, that's great. And yeah, just focus on the high impact and take the person out of it and the individual out of it, which is all fantastic advice. Great. And I'll ask, my next question will be around transitioning into such a role like Shopify. And maybe Wenshu, if you don't mind if I ask you again, how did you transition into the role of Shopify? I guess, what was your old learning versus your new learning? So how did you incorporate the best of your old and at the same time get up to speed and with the new way of working?
I think Shopify is the first company I've joined that is like 100% remote. And before that, of course, due to COVID, we were working from home. But then I always worked in companies where there was an office, right? And then I knew that even after COVID, I wouldn't go back to an office, right? So coming into Shopify, it was a huge jump for me, right? To never be in an office, right? That's something that I've had to learn. So I think primarily asynchronous collaboration, right? Because we work a lot with people in many different time zones. So you need to kind of accept that. When you want to get something, right, you're not going to get a response immediately, right? So kind of learning how to design your work around that. right? So we spend a lot of time actually like on documentation, which sounds like a terrible thing. Right? A lot of designers like they hear documentation and they're like, oh, no. But what I've learned is it kind of forces me to be very clear about what I'm doing, and then really forces me to think about what I'm designing, be very intentional. Right? When I first started at Shopify, it would take me like maybe 1 hour, 2 hours to write a document, but now it's maybe like 30 minutes. It's still a bit too long. Still trying to get it down, but then like really learning how to communicate the most I can, as clearly as I can, with as little words as possible. And in a way, it also helps me be much better at thinking about my work and explaining it. So sometimes we don't even do meetings, right? We just send a document, hey, this is what I'm thinking about. These are the decisions that we need to make. And then you go to sleep. The next day, you wake up and North America has replied and a decision was made, right? So, and that's quite nice. But I would say it did take quite a long time for me to kind of learn this. So that there's an adjustment that needs to be made, like when you go remote.
I love that, and I think it could be put into everything that you should do, because miscommunication is and rework is the two biggest issues which documentation solves. Chelsea, have you anything to add with that? And I don't know if it's frozen for me or not, but I'll maybe ask, going on to onboarding remote teams, what changes have you made, and how does it work? And Chelsea, can you hear me?
Oh, no.
we might have lost Chelsea, but that's okay. We'll reconnect with her. Ben, I might ask you that same question with regards to onboarding remote teams. What changes have you made with the approach?
Yeah, so I think similar to Wenshu, this is the first time I've actually had to be an onboardee in a remote environment. I have onboarded other designers in a remote environment, but I've never been on the other side of it. So I think that some aspects of it is just grappling with and trying to understand how do you even get stuff done. Especially, like, I think that the first few months in an organization, you usually have like a bunch of coffee, like real life coffee and lunch table conversations and stuff like that. And that helps build relationships and build rapport. But in a remote setting, none of that happens. So then how do you try to recreate? I think when done poorly, we try to recreate the office setting online. And that's only works to a certain level, I think. But I think that some things that have personally worked for me in terms of in terms of onboarding remotely is setting up these coffee chats with various different people from various different places. And the best part is, since I'm not confined to an office, I could be talking to somebody from Canada one evening and then somebody else from, I don't know, UK the next day, right? And that kind of a freedom doesn't exist if I was just staying in an office. Then I'll be usually forced to the confined office space itself, and everybody would be in the same organization or same building. And those kind of stuff actually definitely help me think a little bit broader, because the scale of impact could be much greater in a company that's across different geographies. You have so many different cross-cultural things that you can learn from people from other countries, the way that they work, the kind of processes that they use, principles that they use, and stuff like that. So those are some of the stuff that I think was quite insightful to me when I was onboarding in a global organization.
Yeah, great. And Wenshu, have you anything to add there?
And I think maybe one other thing, I think you can't replace in real life like interactions, right? So I think one thing Shopify is planning to do as well, but we couldn't because of Omicron, is like this thing which we call a burst. So for at least 4 to 6 times a year, your team can all fly together to one place, like anywhere, right? And then kind of like spend like 3 to 4 days together. So that's one way to kind of still have that in real life, right, interaction like with your team, and then you can do it with different teams, right? Maybe people in your org, people in the design team, your actual like team, product team. I think that's one thing that we're also trying, but we haven't like experienced it yet, like due to how the world is right now.
Yeah, no, it's something we've actually seen people do for our conferences. A lot of teams came into Dublin, and we as a team just decided to do the exact same thing. So previously we've gone to Bali before, and we're planning on doing New York, just because getting away from it and working together in an environment is just, nothing beats it. And you don't have to do it always, but it is a lovely experience from a bonding perspective. And have you been anywhere, Chelsea? You probably haven't been anywhere yet because it's 2 months and it's the pandemic. But is there any exciting plans for the team to catch up?
I mean, there are plans.
There are plans, but COVID.
Well, you'll have to keep us posted on how those plans come to life. Maybe a few photos would be nice. So I hope it comes to life, because a few teams I've heard have gotten over to Raleigh in the US and different places to meet, and it seems like it's a really exciting thing to do. And just before we wrap up, we're going to have to wrap up very soon. Chelsea, how do design behaviours differ, I guess, between, different levels when it comes to working remotely? Is there anything that is different there?
I guess I would need everyone to help chime in on this, because we are all on very different levels. But I think for me, it's really, I don't see a major difference between what I do, if it's remote or not remote. So prior to Shopify, my roles have all been like in person, and I don't see a major difference. Like, sure, like maybe now workshopping has to be via Miro, and there are no more like giant papers and real post-its that you can touch. But apart from that, I wouldn't really say much has changed. I still talk to my engineers on Slack. I still talk to people. I still have meetings regularly. So maybe someone else will have like a better answer on this question that I can direct to Wenshu.
And if not, we do have to wrap up, and I have I would like any closing arguments or closing points that people would like to get across to the audience. Ben, maybe I'll ask you first.
Sure. Yeah. Is it the same thing about design behaviors across levels?
No, this is just in general. If you have any thoughts on summary based on this conversation that you'd like to get across. So you mentioned quite a few things that I really liked on the documentation and going through knowing your worth versus your work. What's the biggest thing, the take home that you'd like people to take from you?
So yeah, I've been actually thinking about this a lot over the past few months, and I think that considering the current climate that we're in, restrictions and I think generally the state of mind that I'm in, I've ended up becoming a little bit more reflective. Trying to start a couple of like reflective practices. I've never done this in all my career, but over the last 6 months to a year, I've tended to like log a bunch of my mental space and like a bunch of feelings, a bunch of thoughts, whatever I plan on doing in terms of career, in terms of personal growth, those kind of stuff. And I feel like that's helped me organize thoughts and think about where I want to go in, 6 months to a year. I feel like 3 years probably feels a little too far off for me to plan. But yeah, I think that's helped me also become a little bit more reflective, a little bit more intentional about how I want to own my own career. And I think that's something that I definitely encourage other people to do.
Yeah, I love that. Vihar, how about you?
If I have to like pick one, considering the whole remote environment, collaboration, cross-discipline pairing is even more important, to build relationships, to to avoid roadblocks or things like that, and it should be intentional, and designers and everyone else should get out of their comfort zone, like talk to people and collaborate even more effectively. So yeah, that would be my final lines, I'd say. Yeah.
Lovely. Chelsea?
I've actually become a lot more organized ever since, I guess, this whole pandemic happened. And so, I mean, because now the lines between work and, I guess, personal life are a lot more blurred, I've realized that if I don't actually set boundaries, I get burnt out very easily. And I actually learned this the hard way. I got burnt out. So what I do now is I have a schedule that I really follow, like maybe, and I mark that out on my calendars as well, on both my work and personal calendars, so that people who want to work with me can see it. So like past this certain time, no meetings. This is my private time, and like I make sure to like work out like at least like a few times a week, just to get that sanity back into my mind. Yeah.
I love that. I think that's incredibly important. It seems very much so for the Shopify team as a whole, because you do work globally, and it's figuring out how you can still work globally. And like what you were saying about when the team wakes up from the US, you've got your answers. That's a really efficient way of doing it and taking a step back. And then I'll finish on you, Wenshu. Do you have anything to add too?
So maybe two things, right? So like really invest in having intentional relationships. And the second thing is, you're not that, design is not that important, right? Have humility and then work with non-designers. So yeah.
Love it. Yeah, are you going to become an engineer, by the way?
No, but I was once told I look like an engineer on the first day in design school.
I don't know how to take that. But thank you all so much. I really enjoyed that conversation, and you all are absolutely wonderful, and Shopify is lucky to have you all. So thank you very much. And